Coming up on the Civil Discourse, author, professor, sociologist, and columnist for the New York Times, Tressie McMillan Cottom, discusses her writing as a Black female intellectual, her best-selling book, Thick, and other essays, as well as the impact of her cultural criticism in the world of social media.
Fundamentally, the only thing that has ever really impacted political discourse, I think, and moved people to see the world in a new way is narrative and story. And so I didn't think I was doing myself any favors by cutting myself off from that really powerful tradition. And so what you have there is me both wrestling with that, coming to terms with that, and I hope ultimately owning it.
Hello, I'm Paula Marantz Cohen, host of the Civil Discourse, speaking to you from my office at Drexel University in Philadelphia. The goal of the Civil Discourse is to introduce our viewers to guests with diverse opinions and life experiences. They are all accomplished people who, even when we disagree with them, can help us think more critically and empathetically about the world we live in. Today, my guest is Tressie McMillan Cottom, a professor of sociology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, a columnist for the New York Times, and a recipient of a MacArthur Genius Award. Professor Cottom has published 2 books, as well as numerous essays that look at our culture through the lens of a Black female intellectual. Her insights can be controversial. They are always interesting. Tressie McMillan Cottom, welcome to the Civil Discourse.
Hello, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, I want to start by quoting from one of your works, a collection of essays titled Thick. I think this gives a good introduction to your voice and subject matter. You write, "On one of my first forays into publishing, an editor told me that I was too readable to be academic, too deep to be popular, too country Black to be literary, and too naive to show the rigor of my thinking in the complexity of my prose. I had wanted to create something meaningful that sounded not only like me, but like all of me. It was too thick." I love that, and I think you're really getting at what makes your writing so delicious to read. Tell us about how you define thick and why you embrace this quality.
Yeah, and I love the idea of it being delicious. I like that a lot. So thank you for that. When I was writing this book, I had been trained as an academic, but I had grown up steeped in the African-American literary tradition and in the oral tradition. And so all of those things were a part of what made me. And I was writing thick at this moment for me intellectually where no one had said to me that I needed to make a decision, but I felt compelled to make a decision about how I would speak into the world, right? Was I going to speak in this register of sort of a trained academic, or was I going to speak in my natural register, which some people feel is colloquial? What was I saying about the culture that had produced me if I felt the need to sort of code switch in this way? But I was recognizing that I thought that I had earned the right and the space to have a conversation that was as full and nuanced and as complex as the people and the places and the histories that had made me, and that in no way undermined or contradicted the academic rigor or training that I had undertaken. And that, in fact, not only did it not contradict that training, but I fundamentally believe and have found it to be true, certainly since Thick came out, that people are able to wrestle better with the academic nuance precisely because I embrace the importance of voice and narrative. And this wasn't new to everyone. It was, however, a process of discovery for me. But what fundamentally, the only thing that has ever really impacted political discourse, I think, and moved people to see the world in a new way is narrative and story. And so I didn't think I was doing myself any favors by cutting myself off from that really powerful tradition. And so what you have there is me both wrestling with that, coming to terms with that, and I hope ultimately owning it.
I couldn't agree more. I think as an academic, one should transcend ultimately the language of academia, but very few do, and you do. And as a result, it's a much more powerful message than if it were couched in all that, I would call it jargon and intellectual pretension in a way. I mean, it's the code of the university. And we need to break through that, I believe, on many different fronts. But I wanted to ask you, one of the things you note in your book is how eager Black women have been for education, that's been a drive that has been very central to many Black women's lives. And I wonder how it has both positive and negative manifestations in the culture, this drive to be educated. Tell me your thoughts on this.
Oh, it is so complicated and it is emotionally fraught. You know, one of the things that we tend to be intensely proud of as a culture and as a community, and that I'm also very proud of because it is phenomenal. We are not 50 years out of enslavement in this country before we are building colleges and universities. It's just unfathomable to go from being legal chattel slavery to building institutions of higher learning for yourself speaks to me to the indomitable spirit and desire for human flourishing in my people in the face of having no reason to believe it was possible. I mean, it is just absolutely mind-boggling to try to imagine looking out over the vastness of post-slavery America and thinking, you know, we'll build a college, right? But that is what we did. And it starts, I think, this relationship between freedom and education in the Black American experience. And Black women were central to that for a few reasons. Women and mothers are, in almost all cultures, they are the primary agents of socialization. So if you want to educate a household, you educate the mother. And so Black women were very much a part of building that sort of educational pathway from our very, very beginnings here in this culture. And the way it shows up today is almost a not uncritical aspiration for education, but certainly a sort of enthusiastic aspiration for education at all costs, at all costs. And now this is where it gets really problematic. So having that sort of like unchecked enthusiasm for education in the early 20th century is a different story. Certainly the middle of the 20th century, we are building public universities and colleges across this country at an unparalleled rate of expansion. Higher education, while it certainly was not easy for Black Americans to obtain, it was possible for the first time. Then the GI Bill and GI Bill expansion comes along. Historically Black colleges and universities are expanding, then the community college system. So our aspiration for college was mostly affordable and aspiring to educational credentials was then basically a universal good thing. There was nothing bad about going and taking some additional classes. What has started to happen, however, by the end of the 20th century and into where we are now is that the unchecked cost of higher education has really perverted Black women's investment in higher education. Because of the complexity of our lives, we tend to be primary caregivers. We inherit negative wealth, as most Black Americans do. And so that puts us in a negative position to choose college on equal terms with most white families. So that means we tend to have to choose among colleges that are accessible instead of affordable. So high cost online schools, for-profit schools. And because of that, we have taken on significant amounts of debt. So our aspirations and our belief in college have been perverted by the debt.
Yes, and this connects to your other book, Lower Ed.
Yeah.
But this drive at all costs to be educated will mean, as you say, going perhaps to schools that haven't been properly vetted, number one, and number two, are too costly for what they offer. And I
Yes.
get that.
Yeah, and our faith in education, what we're really trying to do here, usually with our faith in education, is we're trying to counter all of the marks against us, all of the strikes against us. I like to say that nobody believes in meritocracy more than a Black woman. We absolutely want to believe that getting the right skills and the right credentials will make us legible.
But there are a lot of exploitation out there of the idea of meritocracy.
Exactly.
And it gets sold and packaged in ways that are problematic. So I absolutely agree with you. In your book, you also describe, I think, a fascinating demarcation between what you call Black and Black ethnic, that you feel is very much in operation in the way universities and other organizations think about admission and hiring. Can you define those terms and explain the problem?
Yes, and we're absolutely seeing this. I think it's going to be a very salient here as the Supreme Court makes its decision on affirmative action. And that has been higher institutions of higher education, but not just, as you point out, colleges and universities. I think lots of institutions who have used the language of diversity and inclusion designed to try to counteract years of exclusion of African Americans. The expansion of that definition over time has really watered down the opportunity for African Americans, right? And one of the ways that shows up in colleges and universities is people have shown that universities have a preference for non-American Black ethnic students and faculty that will check the box of diversity. But some faculty administrators feel like they do that without bringing the political baggage of Black Americans.
So do you think that's happenstance, or do you think it's preferred that Black ethnic is hired?
Yeah, I don't think it's happenstance. I think that it happens too regularly for me to think that it's happenstance. Now, I don't know that it's always conscious.
Yeah.
I think it is one of those things where the language gets so slippery. When we have a points system for diversity, for example, that will say, well, not only is this person Black, but they are also an international student, and they also bring language diversity. And so that sort of gamification of diversity adds a sort of value added.
And sometimes they're coming from, they're very wealthy and can pay full freight.
And can pay.
That's an important issue in universities now.
It's a huge part. Yeah. That's right. And then on the faculty side, they are coming in on visas, which make them more, shall we say, amenable to the administration's control.
Interesting. I didn't think of that. Yeah.
If you are working on a visa, we see this in the tech industry too, right? You're working on a visa, you're much less likely than to sign on to the open letter that challenges the administration. So there are many reasons that institution that wants to sort of protect and defend itself would value a certain kind of diversity.
Do you see that at the University of North Carolina, where you are?
Yes, I see that at every university. I've been in University of North Carolina. Chapel Hill is not, is not special in that respect. I do think that our history, that our location in the South makes us, makes it more visible because we have a sizable Black American population. But it has been the case at just about every university that I've either worked or visited. Yeah.
The diversity, equity, and inclusion drive at universities, do you feel that's been useful and has made inroads, or do you feel it's not being conducted the best way it could be, or there's an alternative way in which this could be done?
I think it has done exactly all it was designed to do, which was to be a depoliticized vehicle for looking diverse without changing.
For numbers, right.
That is right, without changing anything about the way the university works. So most DEI initiatives at universities have not come with what is the real power in universities. And it is still true that the power in universities lies in tenure. Most DEI initiatives are outside of departments, which means they do not have tenured faculty attached to them and cannot tenure faculty. And so from the outset, they had very little political power. Most of them had very small budgets. I always say I can tell how serious a university is about diversity if you tell me, one, who they hired to run it, and two, how much money they gave them. And I can tell you what they were really charged to do.
Okay, I don't disagree. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about your presence on TikTok, where there was a bit of a, I guess, a controversy, brouhaha, whatever you want to call it.
Let's go with kerfluffle. I like kerfluffle.
A kerfluffle, okay. When you were briefly suspended for deconstructing the concept of blonde, and a version of your thoughts on this appeared very recently as a New York Times op-ed. Can you give us a quick summary of your argument and why you think it sparked so much pushback?
Oh, talking about blondness, by the way, in public and as an intellectual subject will always get you in trouble. Doing it as a Black woman intellectual will especially get you in trouble. So one, you should know that I'm not surprised that it angered people. I was a little surprised by the fierceness of the response, but it was not my first time at this particular rodeo, which is deconstructing a taken for granted belief of whiteness. To be very honest about that, that's what that is, and that's
what about the dumb blonde?
What about her?
But that is, you're right, it's white, but it's very denigrating.
Is it?
I think so.
If a dumb blonde is more useful to white patriarchy, then it is not actually denigrating in the sense that it is a negative stereotype. Stereotypes can be not positive, but not necessarily be denigrating. And the dumb blonde is a perfect example of that. I'm actually working on the next essay about that very thing. So if it makes you, which is what it does, if being a dumb blonde was such a negative stereotype, we would not see so many wealthy, powerful white women dye their hair blonde.
Touché. So one thing that struck me as a white person reading your work is how much your experience places me at a distance and involves issues on your part of distrust, irritation, and unease. You say, for example, that you can like and be intimate with white people, but you, quote, critically withhold faith in white people categorically. I wonder, is it inhibiting of your relationship to the world? You feel it's necessary? I mean, I guess as a white person, I wonder about this, and I hope it's okay to ask, because it is a question that when someone writes about race and makes these sorts of statements, one immediately feels distanced, and you distance yourself.
Quite literally, I would be dishonest if I wrote from a perspective that centers white people, because in my daily life, it just isn't how I live. I just don't think of it. It just truly is not the center of my universe. So to adopt that perspective for the sake and comfort of an imagined reader would be dishonest. And the best way to write something bad is to be dishonest. And above all, I don't want to write anything bad. So that's one thing. The second thing about what it means categorically is that it is not possible, I think, to be truly intimate with someone whose identity is still invested to any degree in a political construct that is built in opposition to my existence. So I can be intimate with white people who have divested from whiteness. It is not my fault that there are so few of them, but I have wonderful friends who are actively working on divesting from it, and we have wonderful intimate relationships to the degree of their divestment. But that's like, to my mind, asking women, which I also think is absolutely mad, asking women to be intimate with men whose identity is built on patriarchy.
Right. But to be invested in whiteness is sometimes about just being in society in a given role. What if you're invested in your own ethnicity, say? Is that different if you're you know, Italian or Hispanic, or you have or Jewish, and that's an investment? How does that stand with respect to what you're saying?
Yeah, being Italian is not being white unless you choose to be. And in fact, you gave up a lot of your ethnicity to be white. The process of whitening white ethnics, Italians, Irish.
And Jews too, for that matter. Yeah.
Yes, a bit more complicated because all Jews are not white or white.
Right, and they're not all white. Absolutely not,
So it's a little bit more complicated with Jewish people. which is why we have such a political affinity between Black and Jewish people historically, I think.
Yeah.
But the process of the whitening of what we would call white ethnics has been exchanging their ethnic identity for whiteness. So no, if you want to invest in being Irish, in fact, that's usually a good thing. It creates distance between Irishness and whiteness. But that is not a process that I, as a Black person, can facilitate or have any control or really even legitimacy over. That is such an inter-community and inter-identity process. And one of the things that I'm saying in the distancing is exactly that. I'm not responsible for it. I just bear the brunt of it.
You made the point in your book that you wanted, at an earlier point in your life, you wanted to see a Black woman columnist in the New York Times. And you wrote that you celebrated the signing of Michelle Alexander, yes, the author of The New Jim Crow, to that role. Now you are a Black female columnist for the New York Times. How does that feel? And do you see this as a great triumph? And you mean, you have a platform, obviously, that's wonderful, the New York Times. But the New York Times is a very establishment paper for all that it's trying its best to be progressive in certain ways. Do you have new ideas about what this means to be a columnist for the New York Times since you've had this role?
Yeah, I got to say, so my first thing was when they asked me to do it, I said, oh, there's no way I can do it. It will look like I was always planning it. So my first instinct was to go, oh, no, that's bad optics. Because I was so thrilled with Michelle Alexander and have a short list of people. I just wanted them to ask me who they should hire, because I had been keeping a short list of people that I wanted them to hire, and my name was not on the list. So many people do not believe it, but I was actually very surprised. I just don't think you get to write as much junk about the New York Times as I have over the years and then be hired by them. But here I am, and I do not take it lightly. You know, I try not to be in love with the institution. I actually think that's really important. You know, Nate Silver told me something when I was thinking about whether or not I was going to accept it. And I really did wrestle with it for the reasons that you say, right? This is an establishment institution. And I thought the voice of the institution was so clear in the public discourse. People know what the New York Times sounds like.
Yes.
And the thing that I am the most invested in and the most proud of, frankly, is my writing voice. And I wasn't sure those two things could peacefully coexist. And so I talked to a ton of people. And Nate Silver said something to me that ended up being really critical to my decision. He said, you know, Tressie, he said, I think that when new columnists come in, no matter how critical they've been of the Times, they have a little bit of honor and deference to the institution. He said, and I think they come in and they change their voice to what they think the Times should sound like. He said, because nobody really pressures you here. He said, but I think it's our own deference. He said, so the real struggle will be for you not to change your voice because you are intimidated by the institution. And you know, he was right.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Do you feel there's a subliminal push or something when you're so established and now quite famous to soften some of those edges?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It is the mellowing effect of success. And I'm very I'm very contrarian about it.
Yeah.
I do try to be brutally honest with myself, though. I say to myself, listen, I'm not above this. If it could happen to, you know, it's happened to greater thinkers than myself, that success is seductive, comfort is seductive, and this is very comfortable. This is such a comfortable way to write.
The things that you were angry about recede a little bit when you're successful. I mean, you can see them more in the abstract, but you're not feeling them as much, I would imagine.
I think if I had ever just been feeling those things for myself, right? So there is a politics of grievance, of personal grievance that motivates a lot of writers and thinkers. But a lot of my grievance is about collectivism. So whether I am individually successful or not really has not changed the landscape for other Black women, for example.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, and so I maintain a lot. Trust me, I'm not short on grievance or anger, but it is very collectivist now. What I have had to change is that I cannot assume the voice of authority on that anger. I defer to others on that.
Do you think, just to move a little bit to another point that you make in your book, Thick. Do you feel that there have been changes in the conception of beauty in this country? Do you feel that things have become more variegated, more open? I mean, certainly when you look at the media, there does seem to be more variety. I'm not quite sure if I believe it's truly open. What's your thought?
More varied, not less corporate. And I think that's why we feel that tension. Like, it is still corporately controlled, and that's why it's a top down, but it is more varied, and certainly more varied than it's ever been. My mother looks at the makeup ads and stuff these days, and she's just blown away. Like, options available. Listen, when my mother, she used to have to mix up her own foundation. It didn't come in her shade.
Well, this is a market. You know, it's also capitalism,
yes, but it's
right?
a market. Yeah. That's the tension. Yeah. It is a market, right? And trying to hold both of those ideas at one time is the challenge. But I will say that, yes, the idea of beauty is being challenged by its opening up and it becoming more diversified. And I think that is why so many people feel so complicit in it right now.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Anyway, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank our audience for tuning in to the Civil Discourse.